Solo Leveling Season 2 Episode 8 was a major action highlight, and that's particularly mind-blowing because it has only been 2 weeks since the previous major action highlight. It's safe to say Solo Leveling is firing on all cylinders. Episode 8, or more specifically the second half of it, looked incredible. It was an absolute spectacle, and you know what that means. Let's break down the visuals. Make sure to subscribe. As always, let's talk about the core staff first. This episode was directed by Tatsuya Sasaki and storyboarded by Yuka Kuroda and Yoshihiro Kanno. I think Kanno storyboarded the Baran fight, and it's his work we'll mainly focus on. Besides being one of the storyboard artists, Kanno was credited as an action animation director and a key animator, meaning yes, the second half of this episode was almost entirely handled by him. He did nearly 3 whole minutes of high-level action animation. We'll go through the specifics in a minute. As many of you know, Yoshihiro Kanno is the main action guy behind Solo Leveling. Both the quality and the sheer volume of his work is mind-blowing. He did a ton of work for Season 1, he was involved with practically every other episode, and his output included storyboard work, animation direction, key animation, second key animation, and even in-between animation. In-between animation, who does that? Him and Tatsuya Yoshihara, that's it. Basically, he was a one-man army for Season 1, and compared to that, his output in Season 2 has been lacking, referring strictly to the amount and not the quality. I'm sure Season 2 has a tighter production window, but still, all Kanno did up until this point was some animation direction work for episodes 2 and 4, and key animation for a high-quality cut from episode 6. It was clear that he was working on something big in the background, and this was it, presumably. Episode 8 is the one Kanno went all out for, at least one of the ones, and naturally it looked incredible. Kanno's participation isn't exactly a surprise. He probably wanted to handle this fight. His countdown illustration for Season 2 featured Jinwoo vs Baran. The version of this fight from the opening was animated by him. He probably called dibs on this fight since the start. With all that out of the way, let's go through this episode scene by scene. Like I said near the start, I'll skip over the first half. There wasn't anything wrong with it, minus some jank here and there, but it understandably paled in comparison to the second half. This short bit of close quarters combat looked cool though. As for the main fight, oh boy was it a spectacle. Before we go through it, I think I should talk about Yoshihiro Kanno's style for a minute. Kanno is a master of timing, especially when he's in charge of the storyboards alongside the animation, as was the case here. His ability to create smooth, fast-moving action scenes is unparalleled. Yes, it might come off as a bit too much at times, as a bit hard to follow, but his execution is usually so flawless that in your head, it just looks right. Even if the actual action is difficult to follow, your brain instinctively knows that what's happening on screen is correct. This is because of the way he handles the transfer of energy between cuts and the way he paces his action. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that yes, some of his work, including some of this episode, can come off as visually overwhelming, but usually there's method behind the madness, at least in my opinion. Anyway, let's go through the fight. First things first, 2D dragons, you love to see it. Yes, the drawing quality wasn't too over the top. It wasn't a free run or a Mushoku Tensei or a Delicious in Dungeon, but it still looked great. The movements felt heavy and powerful. This shot, for example, the wings spreading is accompanied by wind effects. These linear shapes move faster and more erratically, while this circular puff of smoke emanating from the center moves slower. That, coupled with the well-timed camera shakes and motion blur, makes this simple motion feel impactful. This is followed by a bunch of lightning effects and tons of hand-animated monsters. The latter, of course, is really impressive. I have in the past talked about why it's okay for this show to rely on 3D monsters at this point, given the scale of the fights, but they decided to go 2D for this episode, which fair enough. Quick sidebar, the art direction. I was not a fan. The ground looked overly busy, it was clunky and unappealing. Although it is worth mentioning that there's not a single show out there that handles this style of background well, except for Fate Heavenswheel, maybe. Some cool storyboard work here. This low-angle shot looked nice. The timing was a bit Kanno-esque, so it was probably corrected by him. Some of the shadows were 3D, which makes sense. They had the models prepared already, might as well use them. This cut contained 4 panning layers, 3 of which were part part of the background. The first layer was in front of the characters, so it moved in the opposite direction from right to left, while the other two moved from left to right at different speeds. So did the cell layer drawn by the animator, creating a dynamic parallax effect. It's a cool look and it's quite common in anime. Of course, the characters themselves were moving and fighting. Loved the effects here, not overly complex. The fire ranged from 2 to 3 tones and the debris consisted of simple shapes, but the amount and the timing of the effects were really satisfying to look at. Speaking of timing, the timing of the lightning here looked a bit Kanada-esque, which was cool. The draftsmanship in this cut was insane. Baran is inherently difficult to draw, unorthodox anatomy, lots of lines, inorganic shapes, etc, etc. But not only was he drawn well, he was animated. Even this bit moved. It looks static, but it's not. His body is slowly shifting from one side to another, and that's animated frame by frame. It actually moves. Next up on the list of things I can't believe were animated by hand, clouds. Usually clouds are a part of the background, they aren't drawn by the animator, but that changes when the clouds need to interact with foreground components. For that reason, these cuts featured hand-animated clouds and they looked so good. The light texturing done by the photography department added a lot. This cut is so large. It's an ultra-wide shot, the clouds are hand-animated, these spiky effect shapes look amazing, and there's a large amount of debris which helps with the scaling. The scene continued to feature large-scale cinematic storyboards. The sweeping low-angle camera work coupled with the lightning animation was so well done. The cut then seamlessly transitioned to this shot. The blue glow actually added to the quote-unquote cinematic look. Again, look at the amount of effects. You have the lightning, you have the two different kinds of wind, the thick main column and the more transparent shapes at a distance, you have the debris. It's a dense cut. I can't quite put my finger on what sets this cut apart, but the blue tone actually looks good. Solo leveling in the past has been guilty of overusing these one-note blue heavy color scripts, but these shots, in my opinion, look great. This entire section was presumably animated by storyboard artist Yuka Kuroda, by the way. I'm quite fond of this cut. The motion looks really fast because it's animated on ones, aka it has a frame rate of 24. They conveyed speed through body mechanics instead of overly smeared movement. Effective spacing of frames can do wonders for the timing of a cut. This shot, for example, Sung is initially animated on 2s, but as he closes in, the scene switches to 1s, which gives this build-up a wonderful sense of smoothness. I'm not a fan of how static his face is here. The eyes are animated, but the rest of the face is a single drawing being slid across the screen, which looks a bit stiff. Yes, that's a nitpick, it's an animation breakdown, what did you expect? The timing then goes full Kanno. Sung getting thrown around was accompanied by these classic high-energy flickering wind effects, as well as these thicker, more jagged wind shapes. Some really well animated body mechanics here. Full body movement is inherently difficult to animate because the anatomy and weight distribution across the entire body needs to be kept in mind. I feel like shots like these end up being underappreciated. Most people focus on flashy, bright cuts, and that's a shame because shots like these are really impressive. Not only is the running animation here smooth and weight-filled, you can sense Sung's desperation increase as the arcs of his hand become more erratic and smeary. Fantastic body language. Also, the line art gets more thick near the end, which is always a treat for the eyes. What's the saying again? Thick lines save lives. We then get one of the flashiest sequences from this episode. The effects moved fast, the color and compositing made them pop out against the night sky, and the sheer volume and scale was insane. This entire section was animated by Yoshihiro Kanno, the first of many. We start off with this dynamic shot. The camera zooms out, zooms back in, only to then zoom out again. The movement of the effects feels erratic, partially because most of them are animated on ones. It's not like they were heavily detailed. The shapes were relatively simple, but they moved so well. You could feel the energy. We got that classic Kanno beam and sparks, followed by these frantic lightning shapes. Some of it looked like Kutsuna lightning. More large-scale, dense, erratic effects followed. Again, it's mostly done on ones, and the spacing and the shapes makes everything feel high energy. You had 4 main layers of effects here, the 2 shades of fire, the blue energy / lightning, and the debris. None of those layers were detailed, they were flat, but the movement looked so lively. The shot then tracks the effects upwards, which fantastic storyboard work. The scene doesn't give you time to breathe, it's constant movement. Really cool looking walk cycle here, the body language feels heavy and the way the wind brushes off him looks great. We then get some good looking many versus many combat. Not much to say besides the fact that it was 2D and that it was well storyboarded and drawn. More of that simple but highly energetic effects here, even the ground was fully hand animated at one point. There was a lot going on, lots of effects, lots of erratic character animation, lots of complex perspectives, be it the angles or the way Kanno warps and elongates certain components like the daggers, lots of stuff, but all of it looked smooth. He also threw in these slow motion shots to serve as the buffer between fast-paced action. Top-notch body mechanics here, the physical struggle and the weight distribution is so well handled. Also again, more frantic, spectacular effects and amazing drawings. Even Sung Landing featured amazing build-up and release. All of that, by the way, starting from the first round of erratic effects, was animated by Yoshihiro Kanno. That's a minute and 27 seconds of high-level action animated by one guy, and that's not even half of it. We have now reached the animation highlight of this episode. Over a minute and 40 seconds of absurdly high-level action animation animated entirely by Yoshihiro Kanno. This was insane. The rain was a nice addition. It was a combination of digital and hand-drawn effects, and between that, the other effects, the camera work, and the character animation, I can absolutely see why some of you might think that it was too much, that it was difficult to follow. I get that, but to me, that's part of the charm. The scene starts with this overhead shot complete with those classic sparks and some background animation. The camera then pans down and the shot turns into a side profile. The motion is fast, but if you really pay attention, you'll notice that it makes sense. The characters aren't simply flailing their limbs around, their movement is sensible. A couple of cool, easy to miss impact frames here. Like I said, Kanno loves to buffer fast-paced action with slow motion shots. This cut, for example, featured tons of slow motion lightning animated on once. What followed was pure insanity to the point where it's difficult to break things down move by move. The characters were constantly moving and there's so much elasticity and fluidity in their movement. Also, the ground was largely hand animated. This high energy, fast-paced, ultra-wide exchange of strikes is buffered by these slow motion close-ups because again, it's important to have breaks in between fast-paced action. Look at the sheer volume of liquid animation here. So many hand animated raindrops. Yes, it's looped, meaning the same few frames are reused over and over again, but still, that's a lot of effect layers to keep track of, especially because they interact with the foreground. They bounce off the characters. The drawing quality throughout this section was top-notch. I imagine Kanno did his own Genga for this scene. The weight distribution in this cut is insane. You can feel the weight of Sung pushing, and the debris helps sell that weight. Some good-looking effects, energetic, powerful character animation, and strong drawings then bring us to this black and white section. And what more can I say? Every frame is a work of art. The paint-like strokes and the powerful expressions look absolutely phenomenal, and the energy built up by this section is paid off via these high-energy effects and this grand, massive explosion complete with these triangular wind shapes. What a sequence, what a fight, what an episode, what a season, what a show. Yoshihiro Kanno is a madman. And that should just about do it. This was the second major episode from this season, and based on what I've heard, there should be one more. I'll try to cover it when the time comes. That's about it. Liked the video? Check out this other bit of content on screen, like and subscribe, and until next time.